It is Y105, Dubuque's #1 hit music station. My name is Steve Pulaski. My next guest has been a personal idol of mine since I was a child. He served as a columnist and film critic for the Chicago Sun-Times for 39 years and debated movies alongside the late, great Roger Ebert on TV for several years. Now, in addition to contributing to RogerEbert.com, he's the namesake of his new podcast, the Richard Roeper Podcast via American Eagle, which revolves around movies, pop culture, and more. It's available wherever you consume podcasts. He is Richard Roeper. He joins me now. Richard, how are you?
Steve, that's a better introduction than I could have given myself. Thank you so much, my friend.
Absolutely, Richard. I aim to please. What was the movie you most recently watched, and how was it?
Wow. This works out pretty well because it was Weapons was the last movie I watched, the last screening, which, of course, is opening this month and playing across the... It's one of these horror films that's got a lot more going for it. It's told from a kind of a Seven Samurai point of view with different characters. I think this last couple of years, Steve, horror films have been just amazing. We used to talk about, it's elevated horror. Now it's just another genre right there with drama and comedy and rom-coms, whatever else. The films are so many of them are so good.
Completely agree with you there, too. I mean, even something like Final Destination Bloodlines is a cut above, I think, what it would have been maybe 10 years ago. Horror's going through such a renaissance period now.
That's a great example because that was one of those where I'm like, okay, as you know, they're rebooting and sequeling and reimagining every movie that came out in the 80s and 90s. Either it's a streaming series or it's a film. And I like the first Final Destination. I thought it was pretty clever, all the kind of clever contraptions. And I didn't expect much from the most recent one. And it probably exceeded all the previous films. It was really well done. And as you mentioned, it's the performances, the special effects, a lot of times the editing, it has just gotten a lot better.
What's a great movie you've seen this year that not many are talking about?
Oh, man. There was a movie, I hope I get this out. It's called The Friend. Now, people know about Friendship, right? The movie Friendship. But this was The Friend. This is the movie with Naomi Watts and Bill Murray and a Great Dane, and it's a film about, Naomi Watts plays a New Yorker who's in a small apartment, and she inherits this enormous dog, and you go, oh God, this sounds like a Disney movie. But Steve, it's one of the best dog movies. My Dog Skip is one of my all-time favorites. It's of that level because it's about how sometimes animals can become so much more than just animals and pets and true companions, and it's about grief and sorrow and coming to terms with your life. And also, I love the fact that it features Great Danes because, of course, they are. They're maybe the only dog you don't have to bend over to pet, right? Because they're like horses, but they're the most gentle, loving, wonderful dogs. So I love that film.
Ari Aster's Eddington has been among the most divisive movies of the year. What say you about it?
I say that I didn't see it because of the conflict I had in scheduling. So that, it's one of those things where you try to see everything. You tell me, should I see it? Should I make the time in my civilian life to see it, Steve?
The funny thing is, I love how divisive it has been. Was not personally a fan of it, and I'm a big Ari Aster fan. I think this movie's kind of provocation without purpose. In a lot of ways, I think it throws a lot of darts at the wall. I don't think it's explicitly clear on what it wants to say, and I also think that sort of the centrist point of view it takes is a little bit of a cop-out. That said, though, my girlfriend had a wildly different reaction. She loved it. We've had great debates about it. I think if nothing else, the debate it offers is really worthwhile and something of note.
That's really well put, and I'll check it out. It's funny you mention that because I used to feel like I could see every single movie, but about 10 years ago, maybe a little bit longer than 15 years ago, maybe, Steve, I started doing as much reviewing of streaming and television because, as you know, there's so much great television out there, but it's impossible now to keep up with everything, especially with, so many great streaming series, but you have to watch all 8 episodes, especially if it's something like Long Bright River, which was a great streaming series, but it's a murder mystery. You have to watch it all the way through to do a review. So it's interesting because when people say, what should I see? What have you seen? You feel a little bit like you're in a really cool version of Groundhog Day where, you wake up every morning and you're like, all right, here's what's on the menu. What am I going to watch? What am I going to take a pass on? What am I going to check out later? And then, what am I going to watch for fun? And that's kind of the last thing on the menu.
He's Richard Roeper. Grateful to have him on the show today. What's the worst movie you've seen this year, Richard?
Ooh. Man, Steve, you're catching me at the perfect time for a lot of these because I don't know if it's the worst, but it's really close. And it's The Pickup with Eddie Murphy and Pete Davidson. It's this, this heist movie. They're two armored truck drivers, and there's going to be a big heist, and it tries to kind of recapture the spirit of all those great action buddy comedies of the 80s. And I like the idea of the pairing of Eddie Murphy and Pete Davidson, but they're just sleepwalking through this film. And we often talk about how romantic couples have no chemistry. These two guys and I think Pete Davidson sometimes gets short shrift. I think he can actually do some decent acting,
Agreed.
King of Staten Island. But I was so disappointed because you got these two generational SNL stars. Now, Eddie Murphy is clearly more accomplished and has been around a lot longer. And I'm just like, they should have just called it, instead of The Pickup, they should have just called it Paycheck. Because it's clear it's just one of those, let's just go through the motions. And even the action sequences, we talk about, in horror films, so well done. Everything here, it's just like, God, we've seen this. It kind of played like a second-rate network TV drama, crime drama from 1988.
I want to give you the opportunity, too, to promote your podcast. What's the Richard Roeper Podcast all about?
What I like about this, Steve, is I don't do interviews on the podcast, believe it or not, because I feel like that's being done by, so many people. And as you know now, everybody has a podcast, including, I just mentioned Saturday Night Live. So Dana Carvey and Spade and all these people, and they're all talking to each other. So what I like to do at my podcast is just share my thoughts on what's happening in the world of pop culture, entertainment news, and also do reviews. I keep it to about a half hour. I do one or two a week. And it's, as you mentioned, it's just called The Richard Roeper Show. So you can get it where all fine podcasts are found. And it's really fun for me, though, too, because, I've done, like you, a lot of radio, and I love it, and I'm thrilled that I got a chance in Chicago to be on a lot of radio stations, but it's kind of fun to be able to just do what I want to do and not have to go to the program director's office afterward and beg forgiveness.
You're somebody who doesn't let the grass grow under your feet. I've been following you, like I said, for probably about 20 years now, and so I've seen you on multiple different platforms, everything from, Chicago radio to like Reels channel to Stars and everything like that. It's weird for me, though, a lifelong fan, to talk about your work with the Sun-Times in the past tense. How did it feel when you were one of the dozens who accepted that buyout earlier this year?
You're right. It's a complicated question because, Steve, I was really proud of the fact that, I came up at the Sun-Times as a news reporter and did all that, and then a columnist, and eventually moved into the entertainment side. And then after, and Roger and I had the television partnership, and he was actually the one who encouraged me to start writing reviews way back when, like in the 90s, because he'd go to the Cannes Film Festival or he'd have other duties, and he'd say, well, Richard will do this film. So I was kind of his backup. And then after Roger was no longer able to do reviews and he passed on, I became the film critic for the Sun-Times. And, the amazing thing to me, Steve, was in 67 years, the Chicago Sun-Times had two film critics, Roger Ebert and myself. And obviously, Roger was the king of it and did the bulk of it. And then they decided they're just going to go in a different direction. And, that's their prerogative, and concentrate on other things. And they offered me a chance to leave. And it was kind of like, the thing I was leaving wasn't the thing I joined, if that makes sense. They weren't going to be doing, if you look at the Sun-Times now, I think they carry wire reviews. I don't even know. So that made it a little easier to leave because it just wasn't the same there anymore. And then the other opportunity then to write for RogerEbert.com, which is, run by Chaz Ebert, who has been a great friend of mine for 30 years. That made it a lot easier because I really love writing for the website. If
you could hear Roger's opinion on one movie released since his passing in 2013, Richard, what would that movie be?
Oh, God, Steve, we're going to have to do a whole second segment in a couple of weeks. But, it's interesting because I think about that a lot, and I think the movie that just immediately jumps to mind is I would have loved to see what he thought of Black Klansman, because he was such a champion of Spike Lee from the get-go, from the early on. And Roger always loved films that had a lot to say about society, but were also very entertaining and beautifully acted and period pieces. So that one springs to mind. And when you talk about movies that came out this year, I would have loved to hear what he said about Sinners. I would have loved to have read Roger's review of Sinners.
I would say mine, the one I always think of, I remember even thinking of it as the credits were rolling in the theater, Parasite.
Yes. That's a great call as well. And I also think, and I don't want to jump on movies, but I think he might have had some interesting things to say about some movies that, have done really well, even won Academy Awards that he might not have. And I always hesitate to say, well, Roger would have loved this or Roger would have hated that. But I do think in the case of the 3 movies that you and I discussed, I think he would have loved them. But I just, as you know, people knew Roger first and foremost from television, and he and Gene Siskel, became such icons. But he was such a beautiful writer, Steve, even when he wasn't writing about movies. But he just had this great conversational style. I go back sometimes and read his interviews, especially like we're talking about, sequels and reboots and stuff. I love going back and seeing what he had to say about The Breakfast Club. Or, in fact, American Graffiti, because I was just did a podcast about American Graffiti. It came out in August of '73, and I went back, and Roger, he loved it. He gave it 4 stars, and he talked about how it was this great piece of Americana. It also spoke to him because it was set in the early '60s when he was of the age of the characters in American Graffiti.
A few more questions with Richard Roeper. Super grateful to have him on the show today. How close were you and Roger away from the Ebert and Roeper set? Did you guys go to dinner? Did you guys hang out? What was that relationship like away from the camera?
We did. I was friends with Gene as well as with Roger, and their relationship was really, they were friends, but it was really like it was depicted on TV. They kind of went their separate ways. Gene was so into the Chicago Bulls. He had different interests. Roger and I became friends before I was ever on the show from our time at the Sun-Times. So he would invite me out to his house in Michigan when he had summer parties. We would, talk about different things and hang out. So, and when we traveled to promote the show, to go on the Tonight Show or to go to different affiliates and stuff, it was usually me and Roger and often Chaz, his wife. So we would, we'd fly together and we'd hang out. We'd go to lunch. It was a lot. I don't want to say it was easier, but I just wanted to make things easy for Roger. He and Gene would get into these huge arguments during tapings about how to pronounce a director's name. And I would just say to Roger, well, why don't we just pronounce it twice and we'll figure it out and then we'll edit in that's an easy solution. What a great idea. So, I just tried to make things easier for him because he'd become such a huge figure by the time I joined the show. We'd go to the Oscars and he'd be trying to cover the Oscars and everybody wanted to interview him. And he'd say, hey, I'm still a working journalist. So I would try to take some of that load off him, kind of run interference for him. So I treasure the friendship that we had.
Do you have a great story that you haven't told or you haven't shared very often?
All right, I'll tell you this one because I think you would have got a kick out of it. So this is in the early 2000s, and we were going out to the Oscars to publicize our show and to cover it and stuff. And Jimmy Kimmel had just started doing network television. He was a huge fan of Roger's, and he was there at this party with Peter Berg, the director. And they came up to Roger, and they were gushing on and on about how great he was, and Roger just soaking it in. And Roger says, nice to meet you. And then Roger turned to me, and he goes, was that Wayne Brady? I said, no, that's Jimmy Kimmel. And I go, he goes, well, he looks like a Wayne Brady. And he goes, I know we're doing Wayne Brady's show tomorrow. And I go, so when we went to do the Wayne Brady show, we were backstage. And I said to Roger, see this black guy in all these photos with all these celebrities? That's Wayne Brady. He goes, I know now. I figured it out. I'll never forget that moment. He goes, well, he looks like a Wayne. And I go, he does kind of look like a Wayne.
When was the last time you talked to Ro Khan?
Oh, my old radio. Oh, we talk all the time. For folks who don't know, he's my radio partner for years. And I don't know if you know this story, Steve, but he's now working in Chicago for the Cook County Sheriff's Department.
Yep.
And he's made this great career segue, and not in the PR capacity. Like, he went through the full training. He's got the uniform, the Kevlar vest. It's like a movie. It could be a movie. It's, the radio host who becomes this Cook County Sheriff's exec. But we talk all the time. He's one of my best friends.
I found that out really recently, like maybe less than a year ago, that he made the career pivot too. And I'm like, this is why I don't see him on television anymore or see his writings or anything like that. So I was curious if you two still had a relationship.
No, he's off the social media grid completely. He's living a completely different life, but it's pretty heroic what he's doing. He's helping to bring down the carjackings in Chicago. He's kind of in charge, or one of the people in charge of all the communications and figuring out all that stuff. So, but it's quite the pivot, that's for sure.
Your last book was Bet the House in 2010. I did a book report on that back in high school. Fun fact. Are you planning on publishing something anytime in the future again?
I will say this. I've actually written a couple books since then, but they've been ghostwriting projects for other people, where I just help them tell their stories. So it's not like I stopped writing books, but I insist on not having my name on them because I think it would have confused people like, well, wait a minute, it's more of an as told to where I shape the narrative. I've been asked about that, and, the truth is now my biggest concern is, Steve, is reaching an audience with a book in this day and age, so I think, okay, I'm going to put 2 years into something. Are people going to want to read it? But I do have a couple of ideas that I've been kicking around. So I think since I left the Sun-Times and I've kind of eased back a little bit on the number of reviews and things I'm doing, that might be something I'll tackle this fall. You
were born and raised in Dalton, south side of Chicago. How far was Pope Leo's home from yours?
Yeah, isn't that amazing? About 1.5 miles. Now, he was a little bit ahead of me, so I did not know him. But his house, I know exactly where it is, and it's kind of amazing. I put out a tweet of myself in my Dalton Little League uniform, and I said I once struck out the Pope, and he cursed me, and now I'm in big trouble. And I thought it was clear it was a joke, Steve, and I got all these media requests. Oh, you got to tell us about playing Little League with the Pope. And I'm like, I didn't play Little League with the Pope. I don't know if the Pope played Little League, but he would have been 17 when I was in Little League. Give me a break here. But it's unbelievable that the Pope is from Dalton. It's such a South, and he's a White Sox fan. He's a big fan of Aurelio's Pizza, which is my favorite pizza. And it's so cool because you usually think of the Pope as, and he's really, I think he's a great man. I think he's, a modern man, which is great. But you think of the Pope growing up in some tiny village in Italy or Poland, and, and now if you go to the hometown of the Pope, you can also see like the shoe store where I worked when I was 16.
That's super cool, too. The day it was announced that he was the new Pope, I remember listening to 670 The Score, and they were talking about it and stuff for a long period of time, and they referred to him as Pope Bob from the South Side, and I'm just like, that's beautiful.
Well, the thing is, Steve, immediately on Wikipedia, I was dropped a rank on famous people from Dalton, as they call it. And by the way, Jane Lynch is a great friend of mine, and she's way above me, too. Jane and I have known Jane since high school, so I texted her, and I go, you're number 2 now, Jane.
I've chatted with Rich Coase a few times, and I've asked him this, so I will ask you as well. And I'm not asking, your spot, like it's a once a year, twice a year sort of venue that you go to, like a special occasion. I'm talking about just a good place to eat. What's your favorite spot or one of your go-to spots in Chicago, Richard?
Oh, wow. That's interesting because, there are a lot of the standard places people mention, Gibson's and the steakhouses and stuff. I really like a restaurant called Petterino's, which is in downtown Chicago. If anybody's ever in the Loop, where they call the theater district, where the Goodman Theater is and where they do the Broadway shows and everything. And Petterino's kind of has the feel of those New York places, Steve, where you walk in and there's all this, the caricatures on the wall and the red leather banquettes, and then they just got great Italian food. So it's funny you mentioned I'm going there in 2 days for lunch.
One more for you, Richard. I don't mean to poke the bear on this one, but when's the next time your White Sox make the playoffs?
Oh, well, I used to say by the time the Pope's from Dalton, but now I can't say that anymore. I will say this. I like this team, the young team they have now. Last year, they felt like they were going through the motions. But let's see, what is it, 2025? I'm going to say 2029. Give us 4 years.
Nice 4-year development. The good thing is Colorado's taken a lot of the sting off of them because last year it was like a race to the bottom for the Sox. How low could they go? This year Colorado's really taken that and ran with it.
Oh, yeah, they have. It's you're like it's the old joke, hold my beer. It's like we'll never see a team this bad in our lifetime. A year later, here come the Rockies.
He's Richard Roeper. Again, he's one of my personal idols and has been for a couple of decades. Richard, I want to give you the floor to promote your podcast, your work on RogerEbert.com. Anything that you want to add, where can people find you on Twitter and on social media? It's been a true privilege. I want to give you the final word.
Oh, I appreciate that, Steve. Thank you so much. You do such a great job. And as I mentioned, the Richard Roeper Podcast, you can just Google that. And believe it or not, I have even returned to the world of Facebook. I hadn't been on there for a long time, but again, it's just Richard Roeper. But I like to do a lot of updates there, and I have to admit, it's kind of fun because you connect with a lot of old friends there. So I'm on everything except for TikTok because I think they'd kick me out.
One other thing, too, he's a great follow at Richard E. Roeper on Twitter, too. You actually, when I was working at a previous radio station, we had a show prep service that we had and stuff like that, so talking points and whatnot. You made that at one point. It was like 20 2021, you made like sort of the message board of that kind of think tank sort of show prep website for your movie laws on Twitter.
Oh, that's pretty cool. I like that. Thanks. That's one of the things I've gotten a lot of interest from folks, maybe turning that into a full book, all the movie tropes and movie laws that are out there.
At Richard E. Roeper on Twitter. He's a great follow. And again, via American Eagle and wherever you consume podcasts, the Richard Roeper Podcast. Richard, this has been a complete honor. I greatly appreciate your time. You know I'll be reading and watching whatever you're doing, man.
Thank you so much, my friend.